Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the previous panel that you've attended, and it was really a very substantial and insightful discussion about the role of religion, decoloniality, and its impact to the Anthropocene. As of now, we will now embark to the next part of our program, which is a roundtable discussion about religion, environment, and the Anthropocene. At present, there's an emergency, I think, on the panel chair, which is Professor Sadje from the School of Oriental and Asian Studies, for Palestine Studies from the University of London. Right now, I will temporarily take over on this scheduled roundtable discussion. Welcome, panelists and members of this roundtable discussion. For this discussion from 3 o'clock to 4:30, we will meet the following panelists, namely Professor Jaazeal from University of Bonn, Germany, Professor Abdul Basit Zafar, an independent researcher, Professor Thandi Soko-de Jong from the Protestant Theological University in Groningen, Rekha Ojha from Visva-Bharati University, and Professor Sanjoy Barua Chowdhury from the Dharma College in Berkeley, California. I hope that I pronounced your names correct. And if I ever had a mistake on the pronunciation, please forgive me. Thank you very much. And Professor Jaazeal, can you please commence this exciting roundtable discussion about religion, environment, and Anthropocene? Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Our panel discussion today will be sharing how faith communities enrich the Anthropocene narratives, and we are represented by different faith communities, even the speakers, even ourselves. We are trying to present a way of how faith communities being able to communicate the understanding of the impact of man on the destruction of our environment. Brian?
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
Sorry. You need an assistance for ano po?
You mean that I will now present my idea on this topic, or we just introduce first ourselves? And
let's do it ano po, sabay na lang. So you introduce yourself and then present your idea po. And then after the presentation of ideas until Professor Sanjoy, then let's have a collaborative discussion and exchange of ideas.
Okay.
Thank you po.
Yes, okay. At least that's clear to me. Okay, wait. My presentation. In the Anthropocene narratives, I will present the Christian interpretation. First, the Anthropocene language entered into faith because of our interpretation on the scriptures on how man is the center of all beings. And this is in a way our triumphalist Anthropocene attitude, and this has affected how we relate to nature, how we relate even to environment. And we can say that we have destroyed nature even by this kind of misconceptions. And for a Christian community, I will quote the words of Agustin Fuentes when he said, in the work Becoming Human in the Anthropocene. This is where communities and shared practices of faith and hope become central factors. Sincere and deep reflection enables us to more fully engage with ethical, even moral, responsibilities to others and ourselves. Recognizing that we are amongst the most powerful species on this planet and that we are able to use that power, our evolutionary heritage of niche construction, collaboration, and creativity to shape the future must become a normative part of our dialogue. From this, we need to deconstruct our own understanding of Anthropocene. And in the history of how church communities, churches, even different faith communities gather, I would say there were three periods in the modern attempts to this deconstruction. First, we have the Acc Declarations on Nature, which was hosted in Assisi in the place of Saint Francis. This was in year 1986. There were messages on humanity and nature from Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, and Judaism. And they all agree that we need to deconstruct our concept that man is still the central of all living beings. And then in the 2015 statements, this is the time when Laudato Si of Pope Francis was released. And a few months after, this was also the year of the Paris, the UN Conference of Parties, where the Paris Agreement was drafted. And luckily, I was part of that conference. As I said, the Laudato Si encyclical, and in that gathering in Paris, there was a Buddhist declaration on climate change, a Hindu declaration on climate change, and then the Islamic declaration on global climate change. Again, affirming the impact of our misconceptions of Anthropocene on the impact of, from understanding and the impact of our relationships. And from here, we need to change this kind of perspective to be able to understand our role in climate change or environmental advocacies. And then from Assisi Declaration and then from the 2015 statements, we need to see beyond that. This is now the Beyond Paris framework. Beyond Paris, there were already gatherings until today, but we have to kind of set the enumeration of how churches gather. First, there was a joint message of Pope Francis and the Ecumenical Patriarch of the Orthodox Bartholomew in 2017. Then I would say, since I'm here in Germany, the commitment of the German Bishops' Conference and the Protestant Church in Germany, the Catholic Church and the Protestant, they have this document, the responsibility for creation as church mission, and then lent to us is a star on which we live, from the Acc or the Protestant Church of Germany. And then there was also an interfaith declaration on climate change. Again, the deconstruction of our how Anthropocene destroyed our relations to nature. But beautifully, we can trace it back how the contribution also of Lynn White, where the person highlighted how Christianity is being folded on this Anthropocene interpretation. And even then, we can even say that from the church fathers and into the doctrines of the church, that man is still the primal being. Man anchors everything. Even there was a concept of the degradation, the gradation of living beings, and man is the highest. and the animals are lower beings. These are the kind of concept that the most anthropocentric religion the world has seen, no? As Lynn White said. And we have a way of like justifying our power to destroy nature. And even the interpretation of dominion, and with Pope Francis' interpretation as man is just a gardener, not a dominant person on this planet. Then science and technology have grown out these Christian attitudes that man's relation to nature is like we can use nature as from our own development. And again, this has destroyed our relationship with nature. But again, Lynn White was not just criticizing Christianity, but he was trying to reinterpret the sacred text, creed, and attitude that will be able to transform the Christian views of humanity on how to relate with nature, not as other species, but integrated in the whole of the earth, in the whole of the cosmos. And from this, trying to make this short, we have also the lens of Pope Francis Laudato Si. This was discussed earlier by our speakers, and Pope Francis was trying to put the responsibility of God's earth to human beings, not to have him all the power to destroy nature, but man must respect basically the laws of nature and putting the equilibrium of our existence. And he has dedicated a chapter in his encyclical Laudato Si, and identifying in number 115 onwards the crisis and effects of modern anthropocentrism. And for him, he said in number 616 of this encyclical, he said, modernity has been marked by an excessive anthropocentrism, which today, under another guise, continues to stand in the way of shared understanding and of any effort to strengthen social bond. The time has come to pay renewed attention to reality and the limits it imposes. This in turn is the condition for a more sound and fruitful individuals and society. And he has said again that there can be no renewal of our relationship with nature without a renewal of humanity itself. These are the words of Pope Francis, clearly identifying anthropocentrism as a contributing factor of the destruction of the planet. And we have again to reinterpret our how we understand and reflect the scripture. And in our creation tradition, it is very clear in Genesis that everything to be good, indeed very good. And for Christian, the earth is a creation that must be preserved. It was given to us as a place to live. And the first pages of Genesis already state that the creation of the earth is good. God also that he had made, and it was very good in Genesis 1, verse 31. God's creation is not a product of chance. It is deliberate and created out of love. And the Anthropocene language is the human environment and the natural environment are deteriorating together. And this deterioration of the planet weighs upon the most vulnerable of its people. The urgent call and challenge to care for creation are an invitation for all of humanity to work towards sustainable and integral development. This is the word of Pope Francis, along with Patriarch Bartholomew. And our role as Christians, I would end to this, Christians are called to speak out and act as an expression of their commitment to life, justice, and love. This is from the World Council of Churches. And Pope Francis in Laudato Si, he would emphasize the dialogue among believers, among sciences, and among actors in the deepening of of our Anthropocene understanding. And quoting from the World Council of Churches again, it's time for climate justice. When creation is threatened, churches and Christians are called to speak out and act as an expression of their commitment to life, justice, and love. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jaazeal, for your presentation. We may now move on to the second member of the panel, Professor Abdul Basit Zafar, an independent researcher. Sir, please introduce yourself and then please proceed on talking about your points and insights. Thank you.
Hello, Brian. I hope you can have my audio quite well. And thank you so much, Professor Jaazeal, for your interesting remarks. And I think I would really agree, and I would like to just follow up with your presentation on reconstructing or deconstructing actually the idea of what a human being is. Well, before that, let me introduce myself. I'm not a professor, to clarify. I'm a PhD in classical theology, Muslim theology. So I will just try to take the idea of Anthropocene from a theological perspective. And when we say that how theology look at Anthropocene, I think it's a triad of three things: the God and the human being and nature in between, or the cosmos or the universe or the world, as you want to say. So I would rather share a lot of problems and questions rather than giving a more detailed paper. And the first problem which we have here in hand is, what is a man, or what is a human being from a Muslim theological point of view? So can you hear me? I am not sure if anyone can follow me really. So the problem here is that, is a human being a divine creature, or is it a part of the physical world in which we live in? I think it would be really better if we have a rather more interactive discussion than me just delivering a paper here. But nevertheless, the thing is that the nature or the physical world in Quranic perspective is called ayah, or is called afaq, the way or the signs from which we can see the majesty and magnificence of the divine, of the God. But is it really me? I'm not really sure. So coming back to the point of human essence, from a Mu'tazili perspective, which is a rationalist scholastic theologian, Qadi Abdul al-Hamadani, on which I did my PhD research on, says that human beings have, first of all, a rational faculty, a faculty of reasoning, which is called Aql. And then with this Aql, we have also a freedom or a free will to think with an irada, and also to have a capacity to act, which is called ikhtiyar. Can anybody really see me or follow me there? I'm not really very sure about it. Does it work? Hello?
Hello.
Hello.
Yes,
Hello?
you're audible. You're audible. Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Is he already done with his piece, his contributions for the RTD?
He got booted out po.
Oh, okay. Unfortunately, he got booted out. While waiting, may we in the interest of time, may we proceed to the next presenter? From the Protestant Theological University in Groningen, Thandi Soko-de Jong.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to be
Professor,
here.
good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I think it's me, while we wait for the previous speaker to return. Yeah, very quickly, my topic, it approaches the Anthropocene and religion from an African perspective. So even though I am a Christian, I am drawing from African traditional religions in this presentation. So my starting point is to say that African traditional religion, it's shaped, so African traditional religion itself is not one religion, it's a group of different kinds of spiritualities. And so that's the background. So African traditional religion shaped individual and collective attitudes and practices toward nature. And African traditional religious beliefs are centered in the perspective that human beings coexist with nature, and therefore human beings should not be super predators, because they have the duty to care for their habitat as the habitat has the duty to care for them through medicines, through clean air, clean water, and so on. But we have a lot of problems nowadays. And this partly, well, for a large part, is because over the past 400 years, there have been a lot of disruptions in African spiritualities, and, you know, from big events, slave trade, colonization, and a more globalized outlook, and the spread of world religions. So world religions are Christianity, and so on. So just like in African traditional religions and other spiritualities around the world, they were, or they still are, other, I like to call them other Anthropocenes. So if we look at the global Anthropocene as the impact of humans on the environment, we have to consider that there was always human impact on the environment, but it was different from what we were experiencing now. So I am trying to go back to those other Anthropocenes that sustained the environment and look at what they can teach us and what they can show us today. So in a sense, interrogating the global Anthropocene from the perspective of the marginal Anthropocenes that were there for millennia. So although the global Anthropocene has overshadowed many other pro-environment, spirituality-based Anthropocenes, they are worth revisiting, reimagining, and recapturing so that we can address some of the climate challenges that we're facing today. And if we take Anthropocene to mean the period during which human activity has been the dominant influence on climate and the environment, then surely we have to take into account the localized Anthropocenes that have been in existence and shift our focus from the more academic spaces of discussion into the more localized community spaces, because those are the places where we have the custodians of these wisdoms and with these knowledges. And of course, we have to always be careful not to romanticize the past, because in the case of, for example, Zimbabwean traditional religions, the attitudes that people had towards, or still have towards the environment, had a cloud of fear attached to them. You know, so if a forest was sacred, there was that fear that, okay, if you go into that forest without permission, then you could die, or there could be a curse on your family. But how can we reimagine those instances where people hold nature as sacred in a way that removes the fear of retribution, but in a way that says, okay, well, there is a forest and it is an organ in and of itself, and it is our duty to take care of it and to make sure that it survives. So I had a whole paper written on this, but I think in the interest of time, I think that's just basically my standpoint, and I'm looking forward to the discussion and to answering some questions and to posing some of my own. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Thandi. May I ask if Dr. Zafar is already here? Can you continue your presentation earlier? Dr. Zafar? Okay, it seems that he was booted again. Okay, may I now call Professor Rekha Ojha from the Visva-Bharati University.
Yes.
Good morning,
Hello.
Professor. I'm happy
Good
to
morning.
meet you.
Very good morning. Can you
Please
hear
proceed,
me?
Professor. Yes, you're very audible. Please proceed.
Oh, okay. My video is clear, I hope so.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak something on Anthropocene from the perspective of Hinduism. I was asked to prepare this issue in the religious perspective. So I'm from India and from Visva-Bharati University, Shantiniketan, and my perspective is Hinduism. And the title goes Reconceptualizing the Ecological Understanding, Discernment from Hinduism. As I know that this is a panel discussion, roundtable discussion, so basically I prepared myself for discussion, but before discussing, it's better to give 10 to 15 minutes presentation so that not my perspective, what is the perspective of Hinduism for this heated debate on Anthropocene. I would just like to put here a few points. The stand for environmental concern is date back to much earlier than this modern environmental concern kicked off. The realization of the fact that unwarranted human intervention into the atmospheric phenomenon has caused unparalleled climate change that puts the future of human well-being at stake, has deepened this concern at an increased pace. The lethal climate change all over the globe brings up the discourse of ecology and biodiversity in almost all disciplines of scholarship, be it science, engineering, social science, humanities, or liberal arts. So in every discipline, this concern is there. The scholars from each corner of the globe are putting their efforts to tackle up the climate issues, pollution, you can say loss of biodiversity, habitat destructions, etc. In last 2 decades, it has been observed that the problem is not just scientific, but it lies in human perception somewhere and their behavior too. As Bartholomew one in 2003 rightly stated that we often refers to an environmental crisis, but the real crisis lies not in the environment, but in human heart. The fundamental problem is to found not outside, but inside ourselves, not in ecosystem, but in the way we think. This is how he put it, and which I agree to it and with him. Over the last few years, we have seen that the consensus has slowly been emerging among members of the scientific community that climate change is presently taking place at the rate which is unprecedented in comparison with natural climate change cycle that have characterized our Earth in the course of last 500,000 years. Moreover, as a successive assessment report of International Panel on Climate Change 2021 have affirmed that global warming is to be an overwhelming degree. The consequences of human activity, scientists, and increasingly other commentators, various practitioners of social sciences, journalists, and policymakers are now inclined to the view that this anthropogenic climate change is of such a magnitude that we might reasonably speak of a new, you can say, geological epoch defined by the action of human, that the anthropospheric chemist, as we know that Paul Cousin and biologist Eugen Stormer has termed this word Anthropocene. Now, as a student of religion, we must be particularly sensitive to what climate change portend for the future of humankind and all of the creation. I would like to argue that this proposition before moving in the rest of this article to offer some exploratory and tentative thought on some insights that might possibly be derived from the study of Hinduism. Now, the Hindu Declaration on Climate Change, present for consideration to the convocation of Hindu spiritual leader at the 2009 Melbourne Parliament of the World Religions, affirms that the Hindu tradition's understanding that man is not separate from nature and that we are linked by spiritual, psychological, physical bond with the element around us. Hindus, the declaration states clearly, holds a deep reverence for the life and an awareness that the green forest of nature, the earth, the water, the fire, the air, the space, as well as various order of life, including plants, trees, forests, animals, are bound to each other within life cosmic web. However, centuries of rapacious exploitations of the planet have caught up with us, and the radical change in our relationship with nature is no longer an option, as we can see very clearly. It is a matter of survival. The declarations call upon Hindus to take the lead of earth-friendly living, personal frugality, lower power consumptions, alternative energy, sustainable food productions, and vegetarianism, as well as in evolving technologies that positively address our shared need. Now, it also evokes predicatively, we might say that cherished Hindu notion of this is called Vasudeva Kutumbakam. Vasudeva Kutumbakam, the whole world is one family. This is how we call Vasudeva Kutumbakam, is a Sanskrit term which has been used that the whole world is one family. Now, many Hindu point to that. In no other country of the world does vegetarianism has such a sustained history as it does in India. Though the country is far from being predominantly vegetarian, India has long been viewed, and for good reason, as Makkah of vegetarianism. The Manusmriti, the law book of India, furnished a more oblique commentary on the elevated conception of vegetarianism in Hindu culture in its declamation that he who permits, he who cuts it up, he who kills it, he who buy or sell it, he who cooks it, he who serve it up, and he who eats it, they are all slayers. So this is how it is being put in. Now, the aforementioned Hindu declarations on climate change commence with a verse from the hands of the earth, Bhumi Shuktam. It is called Bhumi Shuktam. Now, earth in which the seas, the river, and the many water lies from which arise food and field of grain, abode of all that breathes and moves, may she confers on us her finest yield. This is mentioned in the Atharva Veda, as the Hindus have 4 Vedas. In Atharva Vedas, it is clearly mentioned. Now, however, in this form, the verse is not merely unexceptional, but may even be construed as an invitation to mine the earth for its resources. How else is she to confer her finest yield? The unabashed advocate of open and unrestrained mining will most certainly ask, except by taking the view that nature is inert and waits for the abiding of human. Now, there is reasonably a wide, you can say, consensus among practitioners and scholars of Hinduism that faiths mooring in a profoundly ecological worldwide are not to be doubted. As it is mentioned by Banwari in 1992, the editor of Hindi daily newspaper, Jansatta, wrote a lovely little book on the place of a forest in Indian imagination and gave it as his opinion, you can see, that every Indian village was characterized by the cluster of 5 great trees that symbolize 5 great trees. It is called Panchavrati, that symbolize the 5 elements: earth, fire, water, air, and earth. ether, sorry. Banwari is scarcely the first commentator to have observed that forests loom large in the epic literature of India. But he offers some useful distinction and anticipated the criticism of those who are inclined to dismiss narratives of Indian ecological wisdom as a form of romanticism, suggesting that Hindu tradition was simultaneously pragmatic, respectful of the natural inheritance, and fully alive to the majesty of nature. Some portion of the forest characterized as Shrivan, S-H-R-I-V-A-N, Shrivan, forest of wealth, was recognized as serving the need of villagers and forest dwellers. Though this was not to be construed as a license for unchecked exploitation. The Tapovan, the forest of sages, furnished a retreat of penance, meditation, and reflections. Mahavan, the grid of universal forest, was something akin to the forest reservoir in which all species of life, and not merely human, could expect to find shelter. As one advocate of Vedic ecology has eloquently and suggestively written, according to Indian tradition, it was not a tree that should be in the village, but the village that should be among the trees. Realms and realms have been similarly been written about personification of rivers as goddess in India. The prolific tendency towards recycling present in everyday life, and the extremely expensive notion of the sacred, critically a conception of sacred productive of judicious ecological tenets. In Hinduism, which encompasses the cow, the tulsi, the plant, the neem, the tree, the tens and the thousands of places where the god drops ambrosias, or where Rama and Sita stopped the bath during their long sojourn in the forest, or where the god Vishnu performed his Leela, cosmic play. Furthermore, Radha Krishna says that all gods were given importance to maintain the conception of Ratha. Ratha is an order in this world. The world Ratha, you can say that it's a law or sacred custom of divine truth. Also, it is believed that there are some Rana, depth of God, and to the spirit of decreased body, etc. Therefore, one should perform different rites like yaga to be freed from such Rana of God, and it is called Shraddha to be freed from Rana of spirit of the decreased body. During Shraddha, Hindu rituals performed by member of the deceased family, one gives water to tree and plant and food to the birds and animals around his abode. This is an epitome of mutual love and caring that primitive society adhered to maintain the cosmic order among ecosystem. Against what some would term this idealistic sketch of Hinduism, interweaving the you can say ecology, one can just easily stack up equally varied and numerous instances of unchecked abuse of natural resources in India, and unfortunately almost nowhere as much as in Hinduism holy sites. The mountains are conceived as the abode of God, but at 10,000 feet or even hips of the truss at notable you can say pilgrimage centers such as Gangotri, Yamunotri, you can say Badrinath, and also Kedarnath have sacred the vistas presented by the majestic Himalayas. If the personification of river as goddess was at all intended to secure their purity and longevity, then such an indigenous form of environmental conservatism have proven to be, at least under condition of industrial modernity, a dramatic failure. Not only, you can say, India's river, but nearly all of its water bodies, ponds, lakes, seesaws, temple tanks are severely contaminated. So sacred is the Ganga that may Hindu keeps the veil of Ganga Jal Ganga water at home to be administered to the sick and dying. The elaborate religious mythology that has been woven around the Ganga is beyond comparison anywhere in the world. And yet the Ganga, which serves some 500 million people, is so polluted that at some places it could be mistaken for a, you can say, small stream of blackened water. Nearly the same story can be told about Yamuna, celebrating India as an aquatic form of divinity for thousands of years. David Haverman, in his insightful study of this river, avers that although river had been worshipped as sacred entity for millennium worldwide, rivers worship is a more prominent feature of Indian culture than of any other culture in the world today. It is on the bank of the river in Mathura and in Vrindavan that the god Krishna frolicked on the green, amused himself with a village woman, and created an enchanting world. And yet it is here that it resembles, say, this is a word of Haberman, a river of death, contaminated by pesticides, carcinogenic chemicals, industrial pollutants, human waste, and heavy metals. The ecological inheritance of Hinduism is thus laden with ambivalence. Climate change may perhaps bode, you can say, greater ill for the Hindus than for adherent of other faith, for none other than the reason that so many Hinduism principal pilgrimage sites are associated with river, mountain, and other manifestation of nature. One of the more arduous annual pilgrimage during the long Indian summer is Amarnath cave in Kashmir, at an altitude of 12,756 feet, where an ice stalagmite from inside the cave and has for centuries been worshipped as Shiva Lingam. In recent years, however, the lingam has been melting and has required artificial cooling. Pilgrimage who undertook the long trek to the cave in 2006, and they found that their and they were shocked that a man-made ice stupa was being passed off as a Shivalinga in a word of one you can say pilgrimage, as it has been captured in a newspaper, quoting him. We are deeply hurt to see that man-made lingam instead of natural one regarded by the faithful as divine. I understand that due to climate change, Baba Bhole Shankar, the god Shiva, didn't give darshan, blessing this year, but not telling the truth and constructing a lingam in its instead a big mistake in an artificial way. So this is how he was shocked, and his statement come up in a newspaper. Now, however, it will not suffice to suggest that modernity has imposed burden that Indians, many of whom until recently knew nothing, but the ambience of the village are ill-equipped to address. Now, true that the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has contributed to glacier melt, and industrial pollutants and chemicals have ruined river and lakes throughout the country. And nevertheless, little thought has been given to the place of religious rites. You can say the immersion of the images of Durga. Recently, we had this festival, Durga Puja, Ganesh. During Durga Puja and Ganesh festival, respectively, into river, ponds, and lake in the contamination of the country's diverse water body. Now, religious reverence for a river scarcely provide any assurance that it will even help mitigate the effect of climate change. As one study of ecological change near Gangotri, Gomukh Glacier, ample suggest pilgrimage who were confronted with fact about the diminishing size of the glacier and the pollution, even at the sacred point of Ganga's origin. Nevertheless, instead that these external manifestation of the contamination only point to the fact that the real source of pollution is within humans themselves. I'm sorry to say. In closing, this reflection on the insight that Hinduism perhaps furnished to help us think about climate change, I turn briefly to revisit Gandhiji's thought, Gandhiji as the father of our nation, as we recognized him, quoting him, vegetations like droughts, floods, earthquakes, and the like, though they seem to have only physical origin, are somehow connected with man's morals. If we are bold enough to engage in creative hermeneutic exercise, it may yet be possible to see that Hindus' ecological and spiritual inheritance, at least as Gandhiji understood, is not devoid of some resources for grappling with the critical problem of climate change. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity again. Thanks. Thank you to all.
Thank you very much, Professor
Dr.
Rekha,
Rekha.
for the insightful presentation. Professor Sadje is already with us. He will now serve as the panel chair. However, before Professor Hadje takes over, can we continue the presentation of Dr. Zafar earlier, who was booted out of the presentation? Sir Hadje, okay na po.
Yes, I think Dr. Zafar is joining now with the panel. Thank you very much, Professor Brian. Okay, I think Dr. Zafar, or perhaps we can invite Dr. Thandi for the meantime, or before Dr. Zafar. Thandi?
Hi.
Yes, thank you.
I had already given an overview of, of what my main points were.
And Dr. Zafar will be the last, no? Because Dr. Sanjoy is not able to join. Yeah, I think he got some personal issues with his family. Dr. Zafar? Okay, for the meantime, I think I will throw these questions from the both panels before we entertain some questions from the audience. Okay, so since we are discussing religion, environment, and Anthropocene, perhaps we can reflect on the questions. Does religion have implication? Perhaps it's already answered, but this is a very straightforward questions. Does religion have implication on environmental issues? Second, how does religious belief or theological doctrine shape an individual or collective stance and conduct toward environmental issues? And the next question, does religion really the cause of ecological crisis? And then last questions would be, can ecological crisis or climate change be addressed without religion? Perhaps we can, while we're waiting for Dr. Zafar, as we can reflect on these questions. So you can free. Okay, I think let me first paste the questions here from the chat. And Dr. Zafar is, yeah. So I think let's, Jaazeal, do you have any, okay, do you want to say something? Thandi, Dr.
Yes.
Okay.
From your question, I would say that I would like to answer the part on the role of religion in the Anthropocene narratives. Now, the current theological movement have included movements have included the Anthropocene narratives in the theological understanding. Yes, it is true that the churches or faiths have the role to address the issue on the Anthropocene impacts on environment. And in our conference a few months ago, we said this, that we need transformative effects of our ethical and ecological values. And on my end, I was able to get this statement from the World Council of Churches itself, an organization of Christian church, a global organization of Christian churches. In that document entitled "World Leaders Must Act Now in the Face of Climate Emergency" in the year 2019, the document said, "It is time for metanoia for all. We call for systemic, cultural, and spiritual transformations that may be translated into changes in the ways we live, produce, and consume. It is indispensable that our lifestyles, supported by socioeconomic policies and institutions, respect ecological boundaries. In our different faith traditions, we find strong orientations to defend the vulnerable and to abstain in favor of the less fortunate." And from this text, it is very clear that the call of the churches for us to re-examine on how we do these things. We simply have to deconstruct our concept that we still have the power to dominate creation. And from this perspective also, we have seen how churches today are committed to divest from their investments on in the area of the destructive industries. How churches are trying to correct their the way they conduct these things in the structures. Like Vatican is encouraging the religious congregations, the dioceses, to get out from mining investments, because we have acknowledged that the extractive industries as an anthropocenic influence on the destruction of the planet. These are things that being embraced now, not only within the Christendom, but by other faith communities. And now the challenge is how, as a Christian, will we be able to respond to this challenge of deconstructing our Anthropocene attitudes. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And that is very clear to recent encyclical, I think, of Pope Francis. And how about the Protestant? Because Thandi, do you have something to share about these questions? Because basically the dominant narrative before, like what the white statement that the Christian is the Christianity or the Christian doctrine of creation is one of the need to be blamed, about this climate change and ecological crisis. So at least the Catholic faith now is very clear about how they should, from their own religious perspective, to respond in the ecological crisis. So how about the Protestant perspective or community?
Thank you. Thank you. I think from the Protestant perspective, it's quite hard because in some of the Protestant traditions, there's a lot of emphasis on a very spiritualized, a very abstract approach to faith. So in the context of my country of origin, for example, I'm from Malawi, even though now I live in the Netherlands. you can see that when the mission churches came and established Christianity there was this move to focus on the personal salvation. So first of all, that is the spiritual part of it, but then there's also the very individual part. So as time went by, how do you then approach the environment when it's your individual spirituality that is overriding all these other concerns? So I think, and that's why in my introduction, I talked about going to African traditional religions to see what we can learn from there, especially in contexts like mine, because, for example, now, when you have a church that is located in a community, and the church has nothing to say about the drought, has nothing to say about all the changes that are happening, it goes to show you that there's a disconnect there. While as from the perspective of African traditional religion, everything that was happening in your environment had something to do with you as well. So you were personally affected because you knew that this is the land where your ancestors lived and they left it in good shape for you. So yeah, I think my answer in a nutshell is to say that from some Protestant traditions, we've inherited this idea that we are apart from our embodied existence, and we can exist in a very spiritualized and in a very abstract manner, but that it doesn't work. So yeah, I think I would say that for now.
Thank you. Dr. Rekha or Doc Zafar? Dr. Zafar? Basit, are you there? Dr. Rekha, do you think religion can be, this ecological crisis we are facing now can be addressed without religion? Because that's the dominant, dominant framework in the international policy. They are trying to, questions the role of religion. The mere fact that religion is one of the root cause of this environmental distractions, specifically Christianity, the Western Christianity, I would say.
Yeah, it's a very, very good question and very important question, in fact. I don't have any idea about other religion, but I would like to say from the Hindus' perspective, as I have mentioned also in my presentation, we always talk about a concept. It is called Vasudhaiva Kutumba. The whole world is one family. When we say that the whole world, it includes everything: nature, okay, inhabitants of nature, and human being, everything inside. So as my early speaker, she has just rightly mentioned that in church, if there is a drought, there is the church is not concerned with the drought. But I don't know, in Hindu perspective, when there is a drought, there is a custom that the whole villagers, they gathered together and they do some kind of worship they try to please the god in whatever way. They have their ways of pleasing the god, different kinds of rituals, and then they believe that if they get together and if together they pray to the god, this problem of drought or flood or other kind of problem, they may get rid of. This belief is still prevalent in the modern society. When you go to the villages, I'm not talking about this metropolitan cities of Delhi, Mumbai or something, but when you visit the villages, where you can see exactly, because they are the one who are dealing directly with the field. They are the one who are directly connected with the nature. So this is how what Hinduism is talking about, Vasudhaiva Kutumba. And there are other concepts like you can say Hinduism has a unique kind of hospitality, the idea of you can say reverence to all life. are likely to perceive with like they may also derive comfort from the word. I would like to quote here the word of Len White Jr., who wrote that in no uncertain term, as you talked about, that the Christianity tradition has a strong tendency toward anthropocism, and that in such a circumstances, the ecological stewardness of the planet and the natural resources is a daunting task. Now, on this, many Hindu points to the fact that in no other country of the world does vegetarianism have such a sustained history as it does in India. Now, though the country is now far from being predominant vegetarian, India has long been viewed as, for good reason, as a, you can say, Makkah of vegetarianism. Now, it has also, according to the figure collected by United Nations Agency, the Food and the Agriculture Organization, the lowest per capita meat consumption of any country in the world, less than, to take one measure, 2% of the meat consumption in the United Nations, as this is for 2012 for FAO. Now, the more common resources, we can say, among Hindus to point to their faith, deep underpinning is an ecological sustainability, is to suggest that Hindu text, practice, and the culture more are all indicative to the fact. To quote, there is one German Indologist and a Germanian of the Sanskrit language. His name is Monier Williams, that there is not an object in the heaven and the earth that the Hindu is not prepared to worship. Start from sun, moon, star, rock, stone, tree, shrubs, grasses, seas, pool, river, everything. So, animal. Okay, animal, cow, you can see there is a worship, there is a food for crows also, when there is a rituals called rituals to please the decreased spirit. So this is how Hindu sees, you can say, the whole world.
Thank you. Basit, Dr. Basit, I think you will say something about that. Okay, thank you.
Hello, can you hear me now, Hadje?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. But I'm really sorry that I feel that it was not possible to look at faces, and I felt I was maybe just talking to myself for a while, and then interruption. So yeah, coming back to the questions, there is a lot to talk about. But from theological perspective, I think the basic question here is, when, as we know in geology, we say now it's Anthropocene, and before it was Holocene, you see. So I was checking the idea, and I was reading about it. So I thought that maybe if we can use the term Anthropocene, why cannot we also use the word Theocene? So I think that before it was Theocene, and the first impact on environment or on nature actually started, if we look from a biblical perspective, when Adam ate the forbidden fruit. So that was the first act, Anthropocene, or act from a biblical point of view. And yes, when coming to the question of can we tackle the problem of contemporary environmental crisis without religion, I think we can. And this is actually the point, that religion is a part of the big schema of Anthropocene. And how we can tackle it is not perhaps, the scripture can become a part to motivate for a positive or for a better environment, but they are not the whole of it. The whole of it is actually the human reason, and as we saw also in the presentations, I personally think that perhaps the pagan culture, or more of pre-Abrahamic beliefs, which have also animism in that there is a spirit and there is a soul in every creature around us, were perhaps more environment friendly rather than Abrahamic lineage, to be a little bit honest in this part. Because in Abrahamic lineage, especially also in Islam, we think that man or the human being is not directly a part of the environment, and we do not belong here. This sense of not belonging to this earth or this mother nature is, I think, the root cause of problem. This is one of it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm not sure. I really want an interactive panel at the moment, but I'm not sure if anyone can
perhaps
hear
we can
me.
open now the we can open now the panel for
yeah,
the questions
for a
from the
mutual
audience.
discussion. I think it will
Yes,
be much
yes,
more
yes,
of
yes.
benefit, you know.
Yeah. Yes, yes, please.
Professor Hadje, I would like to intervene.
May I say something?
Please,
Yeah,
please.
please.
Yeah, Dr. Basit, I really agree with your point that it is not from the text that everything is not the religion. It's a reason. It's a very valid point. It's reason. It is not necessary that you have to be religious to be very, you know. So this point I really appreciate.
And I just want to edit here is that, you know, the problem is that when we think that we are not part of this whole planet, or we are not one of its inhabitants, we feel alienated, and this alienation also have its own roots. Actually, perhaps it's more related to the problem of human nature. What are humans? Who are we? And are we just the bodies or embedded bodies, but with a soul? And the soul, what is the soul in there? Perhaps this idea of that the salvation can only be reached through saving the soul and not the body. I think that is one of the issue. Perhaps I'm talking more from a Christian point of view. Yeah. For instance, now there are more than 1.6 million Muslims living around the world, but I am not sure if they really feel that they are part of the world. Yeah, I'm sorry to say, but you know, the divine word is actually communicating with individual, not with a community. You see, so if an individual,
that's actually my question, sir. You know, the Islamic community or Muslim community, do you have any documents that express their, you know, concerns about ecological, crisis or any environmental crisis?
You know, after Paris Summit in Istanbul, very recently in 2015, there was an Islamic International Summit on environmental crisis. And there we can also see, if you read the draft of it, you see that how they use the sense of Amarnath, that the world is bestowed to us as just its caretaker, not as its only, you know, we are not sovereign to use or to manipulate all of its resources. And also from chapter 30 and verse 41 of Quran, Holy Quran, it says that all the troubles or the crises we feel, we face on earth and also in heavens are because of human beings themselves. So God is not part of our crisis. You see, here is, I also want to add one more thing here, being a theologian myself, that the Muslim theology in general, well, is also divided into many parts and portions, and also had many stages of its evolution. But the part is that is God being sovereign and being omnipotent is the root cause of all what we are facing now, or we being human are actually having with our own volition, our own free will, and our own agency create all the turmoils which we know from history, including whatever, you know, you see colonialism, slavery, you know, whatever. And the main view is that God being omnipotent is the sole actor in human history. But Muhammad Iqbal, for instance, and many others, Fazlur Rahman and modernist scholars and also rationalist theologians from Mu'tazilites would disagree with this idea, and they would say that human agency or human have his own agency to inflict pain, for instance, or to commit a sin. You know, this is how we create the idea of taklif, or of moral and religious responsibility, you know, for which we will be, as we believe, will be accountable in hereafter. So if there is no accountability, then there is no free will. And if there is a free will, and if we have this agency and potency to do whatever, this is a realm God has bestowed to us, and we are just a caretaker. We cannot do things which are beyond the divine law. But since we do that, and also inflicting pain on animals, or destroying our landscape, we are responsible for it. So it's not God who is creating lungs cancer in most polluted cities in the world. It's we have to reconcile and reconstruct, as Professor Jaazeal said in the morning session. So I think it's a theological perspective. You have to turn it upside down to see it again.
Yeah, I'm going to tell something about that in connection to that later after Jaazeal. Jaazeal.
Yes, it was mentioned that religions have an impact on the climate disruption or ecological destruction. I would like to disagree on this area, especially when we interpret this in the current developments. Since, yes, it would be good to trace biblically, historically, and theologically our impacts of the different faiths. But now, Anthropocene has a new phase. It's not the religion that destroyed much of our planet. It's, for me, from readings, even from the documents of official documents from the UN, it's actually the climate or collective imperialism of high polluting countries, and even by these destructive high polluting corporate powers. These are now it's not that we cannot blame our religious traditions on the damage of the planet entirely. And much of the contributions are from this attitude of climate imperialism. And we have seen this from recently the UN Climate Change Convention, or the COP26, is still on process, and it will end on November 12, I think. And I quote this from the message of Pope Francis during the high-level segment. He said, "Sadly, we must acknowledge how far we remain from achieving the goals set for tackling climate change. This cannot continue. There is no time to waste. All too many of our brothers and sisters are suffering from the climate crisis. Now is the time to act urgently, courageously, and responsibly." These are very clear words of our Pope Francis. And locally also, and within the church, we're trying to get a white paper on how congregations and dioceses, I mentioned this earlier, are investing into the extractive industries and other investments. Even some congregations are investing into arms company. These are the evils, and Pope Francis is wanting to identify all these things. This is the attitude now within the Roman Catholic Church, and it's a good development. And locally also, we're encouraging local parish communities to do climate action or environmental action that is very relevant. How a parish community can protest a local coal plant. These are very basic, and this can be the involvement or obligation to protect people and nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaazeal. Yeah, I agree. Totally agree. I think we have only 9 minutes, but let me say something about that in connection to Basit earlier statement that, I'm coming from traditions where Pentecostal traditions. Because that's one of my project to understand the public engagement of this evangelical movement and Pentecostal charismatic movement. Now, I discovered that one of the, I think, interesting topic that perhaps doctrine that they are embracing is that, the otherworldly, they always give emphasis on the heaven, and they always think that earth is, because they're always citing some scriptures with regards to that the earth will be burned, it will be punished because it's evil. And unfortunately, this is the dominant worldviews among these the American version of evangelical movement and Pentecostal movement. And I think sometimes, religion really contributed to this kind of, unhealthy, not productive, discourses about ecological crisis. And I agree with Jaazeal. We should not be, reduce everything into individual or religious, issues about this, and to blame religion as perhaps one of the cause. But I think that's very problematic, and need to be qualified. And I think Thandi, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to chip in and say that even though indeed we cannot reduce everything to religion being the problem, but indeed certain brands of world religions that have come into my country, they have brought this idea that and I'm now thinking of evangelical and so on. They have brought this idea that profit is a blessing, and even if that profit comes at the cost of the environment, it's still a blessing, and it opens doors for you to succeed in life. And for me, I feel that it's very influential. I mean, the country where I come from, the vast majority of people are religious people, so it has played a role. And deforestation is quite high. In my country, deforestation is quite high. There was a big battle whether we should mine our lake, one of the biggest lakes in Africa, Lake Malawi, for petroleum, etc. So there's this drive that God blesses people who make money, and for countries like mine where we are resource rich and people poor, you find in religion that endorsement that in order for me to be wealthy, I have to extract as much as possible from what God has given us, in this land, and sometimes it's not sustainable. Yeah, just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Thandi. I think 5 minutes for at least last words from each of one of you.
Yeah. So may I just say a small thing? Yeah, the religion, well, we can say that religion is just a tool which was used throughout history to manipulate and for the vested interest of people in power. Slavery was done on the name of religion. Wars still going on in Middle East were done for the sake of religion. And same can we say also. I agree from a Calvinist point of view that the more richer you are, the more blessed you are, and so on and so forth. And I also agree with Professor Jaazeal on the point that after Industrial Revolution, things started to change drastically. And the pollution and the wars, but I think the main part there, perhaps one could say, is also about the human condition, that we being humans are somehow by default are not able to always do the right thing. Yeah, and then later on we can say either it's God or it's religion made me do this, or yeah.
Jaazeal, final word. 2 minutes.
Okay. I will quote the words of Pope Francis in Querida Amazonia in the year 2020. He said, "Mother whose heart is pierced, you who yourself suffer in your mistreated sons and daughters, and in the wounds inflicted on nature, reign in the Amazon together with your son. Reign so that no one else can claim lordship over the handiwork of God." Thank you.
Thank you, Thandi, and then next, Dr. Rekha. 2 minutes.
Okay, I think from African traditional religion, I learned that it's important sometimes to put binaries aside. So instead of responding to the question, is religion influence or not, I can say it's both. And I think sometimes we have to start where we are. A lot of people in our countries are religious, and what are the things that we can learn from the margins of those religions, things that are actually pro-environment, and how can we capture those and uplift those voices?
Yeah. Hello.
Thank you, Thandi.
Yeah. Yeah, again, I agree with my previous speaker. So it is religion influence or not, it's not very important, but it's human morals, it's human reason is more important. Their role is more important. What they think is more important. It's not that they have to be religious to save the nature. It's their morals. It's always their nature. So human beings' moral is more important for me, and that will, I think, that will help to sort out the problem of Anthropocene. I guess so.
Thank you, everyone, and please apologies for the delay and for this some technical issues. And thank you for some attendees and participants who join us with this a very short but productive. Hopefully, you get some wisdom from our panelists. Thank you for the panelists and congratulations to all.